Howdy everybody, Eatsley here. Today we're going to look at the etymology and meaning of the name Mexico-Tenochtitlan. All right, so believe it or not, the etymology of these, there are two words, by the way. It's Mexico and Tenochtitlan. There's two different words put together. And of course, they're referring to the same location, the island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. And it's a really controversial thing, this etymology of these words. I want to just remind you that when we're talking about words from 500 years ago, it's going to be a little difficult to try to figure out what they mean sometimes. Sometimes it's going to be straightforward. And there are a lot of place names, a lot of city states would in Nahuatl we say Altepet. There's a lot of them that the names are very clear, but it just so happens that Mexico-Tenochtitlan is not very clear at all. So we're going to go over some of the proposals of the name. I'm going to tell you all of the ones that I've heard of. Maybe there's even more than that. And then at the end, I'll tell you which ones are more likely and which ones are more unlikely. So just to begin, we have a list of place names or altepet that are very common in Mexico. So you have this ending right here, of course, is the ending that we see in Tenochtitlan. So it's very important that we see what that means. Tlan as an ending means among. Okay, so among or with something. So in this case, you have Acatlan. Acatlan. This is a place of reeds because acat is the prefix here, acat, or the root word. So it's a place of reeds. Here's another example. You have Atitlan, which is among the water, next to the water. And this one's important because it's got the TI right here. This TI is kind of like, it kind of acts as a glue. A glue whenever the word maybe is too small, maybe, in Nahuatl, if the word's too small, we want to add this glue, or if it just results in a clearer sound. And so in this case, Atitlan was preferable over what would have been Atlan. Okay, so just kind of sounds clear, Atitlan. So T does not mean anything on its own. It's just a glue, gluing two words together. Then you have Coatlan. This is the place of snakes. Okay, so Coatl and Tlan, place of snakes. This one's interesting. Poctlan, place of smoke. So Poctli plus Tlan. All right, so that's Tlan, among or with or next to. Now you have the ending ko. There's a lot of words today that end with ko. Acapulco, for example. You have Malinalco. Malinalco is Malinali plus ko, which means in the grass. So that Altepet must have been very, very grassy at the time to have that name. This one is Ameyalco from Ameyali and ko, in the spring. Sorry, I put on, this should be in for these, in the spring. So of course, like a natural spring, a natural source of water. Chimalco in the shield, from Chimali and Go, and Tehuisco. This is two different words, so this is a little bit more complicated. So you have Tet, which is rock, and then you have Whis, which is something sharp, pointy. So remember we said that the preceding word, when you're adding words together, is going to modify this one, right? So you're saying that it's It's the rocky, the sharp rocky place. So in the sharp rocky place. So let me go to the next one. So here we have, now this one is Tenochtitlan. This one is very clear. There's no controversy over this one, except for a lot of people want to include the cactus into it. So that would be the only, I guess, confusion that would come about from this. But let's break it down. You have Te is from, again, Tet, which is rock. This is actually the glyph of Tenochtitlan. Isn't it beautiful? This is the rock part. This is what the glyph looks like for a rock. And so this is how Tenochtitlan is represented in the codices. If you ever see this, they're referring to Tenochtitlan. So that's the rock. And then you have the Nochli. It's coming from this part here, Nochli. Now, Nochli is talking about this part here, which is the fruit of the cactus. In Espanol, we say the tuna. It's the fruit of the cactus. So you have the fruit, okay? And then the ti, again, the ti here, it's just the glue. So instead of Tenochtitlan, which is kind of awkward, you say Tenochtitlan, which is a little clearer. And so that's how that ti works. It doesn't have any meaning. It's just putting two words together. This happens a lot in Nahuatl. You know, there's a lot of devices where you can make a word that's too small. You can make it a little bit more substantive. A word that comes to mind is the word to, or there's a verb actually. It's the verb to drink. Now it's very interesting because the word to drink is one letter. I'm gonna write it over here. So just a little tangent, but that'll reinforce, you know, the purpose of this theme. All right, so E, if you say E, that means that he or she is drinking. He or she is drinking something. Okay, but in Nahuatl, again, we don't like, well, the language prefers to not have such small words or any awkward sounds. And so there's these natural kind of devices within Nahuatl. So for example, people will say, instead of E, they will say tala'i, tala'i. And this tala is referring to something. Okay, so instead of saying he or she drinks, which would just be the I, they would say he or she drinks something, which is the tala. Something, he or she drinks something. Okay. And then this, I told you about actually, I didn't tell you about the li ending, which I'll probably get to in one of the future lessons. But you've got this li, it's a suffix, an ending. Okay, now if you add this to verbs, you can form a noun. So this is a verb, and it's been transformed into a noun by adding this li ending. And so now you have tlaili. Tlaili is a drink. Okay, so this is to drink something, and this is a drink. Now, they're all coming from this little tiny verb, smallest verb in existence in Nahuatl, by the way, E, just to make it easier to pronounce and to make it a little bit less awkward. So same thing here. All right. Tlan, I already told you, means among. Okay, so apparently Tenochtitlan was full of cactus, specifically the nopali cactus, the nopali, which is the prickly pear cactus, and it's the one that bears the fruit tuna. So no, it's not. If it was the place of the cactus, right? It would not be Tenochtitlan. It would be, let's see, what would it be? It would be Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan. But it's not Tenochtitlan, it's Tenochtitlan. So we're talking instead about the Nochli, which is the fruit of the cactus, fruit of the nopal. Okay, and so this is here. And so we want to make sure we're very clear with what we're saying here in Nahuatl. And so let's go ahead and take a look at it all together. So you have the te is first and the noch is second, which again means that the noch is being modified by the te. And so what that tells us is that the Tenochtitlan is the among the place, or you say among the tuna, okay, tuna in Spanish, or nochli in Nahuatl, among the nochli that is rock-like, okay, it's tet. So it's the tuna that is rock-like. So that could mean a lot of things, right? It could mean that the tuna is very hard like a rock. That's the quality of the rock. Or it also could be it's shaped like the rock. And so there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but that's pretty much what Tenochtitlan means. Okay. So the fruit of the nopal that is rock-like. And we know we can interpret that however you want. But that is Tenochtitlan. Again, no controversy there. Everybody understands and agrees that's the meaning of it. And I mean, you got the glyph here, so there's further evidence. All right. Next, we have Mexico, and it's completely unclear what Mexico means. And there are so many ideas as to what Mexico means. And we're going to go over them one by one. We're going to start with what I encounter most of the time. I encounter this one. And I just encountered it a few days ago, actually. It's Metzli Shikli plus Ko. And the claim is that this turned into Mexico. Now, if you know a little bit of Nahuatl, or if you just follow the construction here, you can see right away that there's some problems, right? How do we get from Mexico, this is pronounced Mexico, to Mexico, which is how it's pronounced now. And so you may think, oh, no, there's no way that could happen, therefore it's wrong, right? And this originally, I believe this was the first person to come up with this idea. This person, I don't know if it's a French guy or something. It was in this book here, but you'll find a lot of maestros within the Mexicayot movement followed the same thing. A lot of people say, oh, I was in a ceremony, or I was in one of my maestros taught me that. So a lot of people who, are perceived to have a lot of knowledge here in Mexico, they will say that. So what does it mean? It means this should be in, sorry, I put on, in the belly button of the moon. Shikli means belly button. Metzli means moon. And Ko means in, just like we saw in the previous examples. One other source besides this one where this appears, it turns out, and I've seen this cited in a lot of places, the most recent one is this book here, Deciphering Aztec Hieroglyphs. I just read that the author, Gordon Whitaker, he's a Nahuatl linguist. He said that the Otomi, which is a group of native people that live amongst the Nahuatl but don't speak Nahuatl, they speak a different language. That when you ask them back then, what is the name Mexico mean? They say it means in the belly button of the moon, or the navel of the moon. So this could also be navel. Again, I haven't seen anybody cite any particular speaker or any particular text, but I've seen that a couple times as evidence that this is the true meaning of Mexico. Now, there's an article by David Bowles that I will link in the description, and he talks about how Mexico could turn into Mexico through various processes. And I don't really like the linguistics jargon. If you like it, check the article and you can see the actual terminology that he's using. I like to try to keep it simple because I know a lot of people are not really familiar with the linguistic jargon. And so what he says, and I've heard it from my Tlamixtiquet también, is that Mexico, when you have sounds like this, there's not a lot of sounds in the Nahuatl language that have a TZ next to an X like that. And going back to the previous slide, the T in Tenochtitlan, this would be an awkward sound. Like I said, in Nahuatl, you want to try to avoid awkward sounds, right? And so basically what will happen theoretically is that this, if it's an actual construction, would over time people would get tired of saying Mexico. It's just really too hard to pronounce. And so instead of inserting a component like T as glue, what they will do is they eventually just blend them together, or in this case, drop this sound altogether. And so they make it Mexico. So if you wanted to spell it, it would actually be like this, Mexico. And so again, there are some valid linguistic processes that could turn Mexico into Mexico and explain, how that conversion could happen. Now, in the article, David Bowles brings up some really important points about vowel lengths. And again, if you want to read in more detail, you can read it, but it turns out that if you look at the vowel lengths of these words, the stress, when you say Mexico, you're supposed to stress the I. Now, if you add these two words together, the stress is no longer on the I, and so linguistically, it becomes a little bit uncertain that that would have been the case, because when two words come together, you can usually follow the etymology by following the length of the vowels. Again, you can read more about that later in the article, but that's just kind of like a quick summary of why this is unlikely linguistically. Okay, so culturally, there's apparently some evidence amongst the Otomi. Following Nahuatl rules, it is possible that it turned into Mexico. However, the vowel lengths, okay, are going to make this a little bit less likely than it would have been otherwise. Okay, so we'll put that one in the unlikely category if we're looking at it linguistically. Now, I'll say highly unlikely, but not impossible if we ignore the vowel length. Okay, so some people in Nahuatl, if they're mostly people who are not interested in etymology, like native speakers, for example, don't really care much about the length of the vowels. Etymologists do. So if you're ignoring the vowel length, it's not impossible, right? But it's highly unlikely. And especially if we want to consider vowel length, that's going to be highly unlikely. Okay. So here's another one that is another. I've heard this like once or twice, but not as frequently as this one. But David Bowles does mention in his article. So you have Met plus Ishik, which is center. This is the center of the Mage. So this is in the middle of the Mage would be the meaning of Mexico in this proposal. So we have the same problem as here. You have, if you put these words together, you have Me from the Met, and then you have the Ishik here. And so it would be Meishik, Meishiko, which again, following the Nahuatl processes, awkward sound, we can change it. We can drop the I and turn it into Mexico. So that's possible using, just Nahuatl grammar preferences. But again, David Bowles mentions the same problem. Highly unlikely because of the origin of the vowel links. So highly unlikely, but not impossible if we ignore the vowel link. Now here's the thing. The word Mexico, okay, so let's think about this for a minute. Mexico-Tenochtitlan was founded in the year 1325, all right? So that's over 800 years ago. It's almost 1,000 years ago, right? So we're looking at these words that are very, very old. And so we're looking at it as present day people, right? And we're missing a lot of information. Well, guess what? The people who wrote about the origin actually all agreed with each other. This is very considerable if you're looking at the writings, the sources. They were talking about the sources from native writers like Chimalpahin, and you're talking about all the Spanish writers also like Sahagun. All of them agree on the origin of the word Mexico, which is extraordinary. And so historically speaking, if we're looking at that, well, that's pretty significant, isn't it? So look, there's three different options that they come up with. They say it could be Meshitli plus Ko, Meshi plus Ko, or Mesitli plus Ko. And so I'm going to go ahead and walk you through all the different variations, and then I'll tell you my final conclusion. So this is a wiki article, which I'll link again in the description. It says, it is clear the popular etymology is incorrect. And this is their sources. It's pretty exhaustive. It's got all of the major Spanish writers here and also the native writers. So look, it says they were walking with their ark where their idol was guiding them, leading one named Meshi as their leader, from whom he takes the name of Mexicans. Okay, so that's one. So this one will support this construction here. Okay, so apparently there was somebody named Meshi. It's very unclear, and some sources say that it was a priest. Other sources say that it was Huitzilopochtli himself, and he died, and he was like speaking to the people, in death. So that's one possibility, Meshi. In this case, Mexico would be the land of Meshi, in the land of Meshi. Okay, the leader. Then you have this one. The natives say that the name of Mexico brought its first founders, and they were called Meshiti. And even after some time, the inhabitants of it were called Meshitin. This name they took from their main god or idol, which had two names, Huitzilopochtli and Meshitli. And from this Meshitli, they were called Meshiti. So this one is going to follow this construction here. So they're arguing that Meshitli is the word that is combined with Ko to make Mexico. So, it's interesting because what happened was, if you look at the codices, Huitzilopochtli was alive. He was like a living person. And so if his name was Huitzilopochtli and Meshitli, then we can say, all right, he died. His bones were bundled up into a sacred bundle, and they actually carried that bundle around from their travels from Aztlan all the way to Mexico-Tenochtitlan. Okay, so this one is very compelling because if that's his name, then it makes sense that Meshitli plus Ko, Mexico would be, in this case, the land of Meshitli Huitzilopochtli, the priest, and then after death, he became a Teot, the priest Teot that led the Azteca from Aztlan to Mexica. And so that would be the land of Meshitli. So they're naming their land in honor of their leader. Another one says they called him by another name, Mesitin, which means Mexicans, because the priest and lord who led them was called Messi, from which the whole congregation took the denomination. So that one would be this construction here. So it's funny, we argued about it today. Back then, they were also arguing about it. Some of them were a little bit more passionate than others. Let me go to the next ones that are a little bit more clear in what they're saying. So this guy is saying that Huitzilopochtli, his name is Mexitli, and it means navel of the Maguey, Mexitli, or Mexitli, okay, the navel of the Maguey. And so this Sahagun is saying this name Mexicat used to be said Mesitli, being composed of mes. So he's actually telling us, so it's Maguey. And for Sitli, in this case, he's arguing that Sitli is a type of rabbit, a hare. Okay, so he's saying that when you say Mexicat or Mexica, he's saying it's a corruption. Okay, he's saying the C was changed into an X, which we do see, like I told you, right? We do see the sounds change over time. And so he's arguing this. And so this one's interesting because it's telling us what this part means, right? He's telling us that this means the rabbit that is maguey-like, the rabbit that is maguey-like. And so Mesitli plus Ko, he's arguing, was the original name for the Mexica. And so it would have been Mexico, but the sound changed from Mexico to Mexico. Which again, my teacher, my Nahua teacher, does say that that's common in a lot of languages, like the S to change to SH and vice versa. So I know, very confusing, right? But the key here, the point of looking at all these sources is no source from the 16th century mentions in Nahuatl that the etymology of Mexico is made up of luna or navel. Okay, so the historical sources mostly support the idea that it was named after a leader. And going back to David Bowles' original argument, he does point out that if we're using the word Mexitli for the construction of Mexico, that it is the most likely because it's possible, grammatically speaking, following the grammar rules and the rules of the short and long vowels, that this one actually follows those vowel rules. Because he points out that Mexitli, the stress would be on the I, which is where the stress is in the modern day name Mexico. And therefore, Mexico, deriving from Mexitli plus ko, is the only one that is supported by historical sources. It's the only one that follows all of the Nahuatl grammar rules and etymological rules. Okay. And so this one is definitely the most likely. Okay. And I was going to say it's definitely this one, but my ticket reminded me it's always best to not speak in definitive terms, especially when we're talking about language. So I'm going to leave it at that. This one is the most likely. We're looking at the historical sources, Nahuatl rules. The other ones, of course, don't follow all of the Nahuatl rules. Okay. And so I'll leave you with this glyph. This is a hypothetical glyph. It's not found in the codices. Somebody from the internet made this in the original article that I posted in the description. So this is what the glyph for Mexitli would have looked like. It's a maguey and a rabbit. So the maguey-like rabbit is the leader, which in some sources say that it's Huitzilopochtli before he died. Remember, there are processes for people who do great things in life, right? There are processes for them to turn into Teo after death. And so this would be one of those examples. Mexitli was so great. He did such great things on earth that when he died, he became the Teotihuatzin. We see this a lot. And so that would explain what is happening here. So in that case, Mexico would be the land of Mexitli. So they devoted their whole land to their leader, devoted leader who helped them get there. And so again, that's supported, mostly supported by, it has the most evidence to support it. And then I just want to leave you with this. There are some parallels here. Tenoch is actually the very first Tlatoani of Mexico-Tenochtitlan. He became the Tlatoani before they were a free people. They were basically, at the time, they were mercenaries to the Tepaneca. And so the Tepaneca would, hire them to go make war for them. But look at this glyph. This glyph, isn't it the same as what I showed you earlier, the glyph for Tenochtitlan? So his name is the Nochli, the tuna that is rock-like. And so if they're naming their Mexico after Mexitli, perhaps they are also naming Tenochtitlan after Tenoch. So it'd be the place of Tenoch, Tenoch's land, and Mexitli's land. So a beautiful way of just kind of putting the two really most important people in the foundation of Mexico-Tenochtitlan together in the names. We don't see this very often in other Altepets, so it would be a very unique pattern. But again, possible. We see it with the glyph here, and we see it with the historical sources here. 100% supported. And so there you go. That is the origin of the famous Altepet, Mexico-Tenochtitlan. Thank you, everybody. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to my channel or consider becoming a patron. I'll put the link there in the chat as well. Until next time, everybody.